Cyrus the Great. The man who built the Persian Empire out of dust, the king who crushed Babylon and united half the known world, died chased down by nomads of the steppes. Not by an empire, not by a rival king to be why riders whose names never made it into stone inscriptions to be why ghosts who appeared and vanished again into endless grass. For centuries, these horse archers were the nightmare of settled civilizations. No walls to siege, no cities to conquer. They fought wind with arrows and distance with speed. And now Alexander, with his proud, disciplined phalanx, stood against that same phantom enemy. But here's the problem. The Macedonian phalanx was a perfect machine for standing still and stabbing forward. Against hoplites, unbeatable. Against Persian infantry, unstoppable. Against horse archers who never stay and fight, useless. Yet in 329 BC, at the river Jaxartes, Alexander the Great did the unthinkable. He didn't just win another battle. He reinvented the rules of war itself. This is the story of how he defeated the ghosts of the steppes, with an idea that no one had ever dared to try before. By the time Alexander reached the northern frontier, he wasn't the radiant hero people imagined from statues. He was exhausted and ill. He had recently taken a Scythian arrow in the leg. Another had grazed his neck. Ancient writers describe him dealing with fever and severe digestive illness, likely dysentery. His officers had to help him mount his horse. Behind him lay Sogdiana and Bactria, territories supposedly conquered, but erupting in revolt. Small garrison forces were stretched thin. Local nobles refused to submit. Alexander was fighting an insurgency while far from home. And in front of him, on the opposite bank of the Jaxartes, a coalition of Scythian horsemen had gathered. Not a massive army, but the exact kind of force Greek commanders feared. Fast, elusive, and nearly impossible to corner. The Scythians rode close enough to shout across the river. Insults, challenges, predictions of Alexander's death. They dared him to cross, because the river's strong current would slow his ranks and make his men easy targets. For once, geography favored the steppe warriors. Alexander was boxed in by revolt behind him, illness within him, and mobile enemies ahead that he needed a solution no one expected. Until this moment in history, torsion catapults and bolt throwers were tools of siege warfare. They were designed to break gates, smash battlements, and clear defenders off city walls. They were heavy, awkward machines that required teams of specialists to operate. No commander used them in an open field, not because the idea didn't exist, but because it seemed impractical. But the situation at the Jaxartes changed everything. Alexander ordered a number of light, portable catapults, the kind the Macedonians used during rapid sieges, to be brought right up to the riverbank. These weren't gigantic city-leveling trebuchets. They were compact torsion engines capable of firing bolts or stones several hundred meters, but usually only in a defensive or siege context. Mounting them on the open bank required carpenters to stabilize the frames and crews to anchor them in the soft soil near the water. It took time. It took coordination. And it caught the Scythians completely off guard. The Scythian riders had gathered at what they believed was a safe distance, far beyond the reach of javelins, arrows, or even slingshots. To them, the river was a natural buffer. They had seen Greek armies before. They knew their limitations, but they had never encountered mechanical artillery used this way. When the first volley was released, it wasn't some dramatic explosion in the sky, just the sharp, violent twang of torsion ropes and the unmistakable hiss of heavy bolts cutting through the air. Yet the effect was immediate. The bolts struck with enough force to penetrate shields, punch through armor, or kill a horse outright. Even when they missed, they smashed into the ground with terrifying speed, kicking up dust and shards of stone. The Scythians' shock wasn't because these weapons were magical. It was because they suddenly found themselves within range of projectiles they didn't expect to exist in the field. Some horses panicked. Riders broke formation. The line, spread loosely along the river's edge, began to thin as men pulled back simply to avoid being targeted. This was the real innovation. Not a new weapon, but a new context for the weapon. Alexander had turned siege engines into battlefield artillery, forcing a mobile enemy to retreat from the riverbank without needing to cross the water under fire. For the first time, the Scythians realized Alexander could reach them before they could bring their own mobility into play, and that changed everything. With the riverbank cleared, Alexander began the crossing. His infantry used inflated hides, animal skins filled with straw and sealed, as makeshift flotation devices. These were not boats, but practical, portable tools commonly used by armies in Central Asia. The men pushed across the current in tight groups, shields overhead, while the remaining artillery provided covering fire. Once they reached the far bank, they quickly formed a defensive line. Alexander then sent a small, intentionally weak cavalry unit forward, barely enough men to survive a few minutes. The Scythians took the bait instantly. They surged in, forming their infamous circle of death, riders galloping around the Macedonians, firing arrows in perfect rotation. It was the same tactic that had killed Cyrus the Great, the same tactic that had destroyed armies far larger than Alexander's. But this time, they were being watched. While the Scythians focused on the bait, Alexander moved. Light infantry spread out. Archers took position. Escape routes were silently sealed with precision, like a steel jaw closing. And then Alexander charged, not limping, not weakened. At this moment, he was pure fury. He led the Heteroi, the elite heavy cavalry, smashing into the Scythian flank with overwhelming force. The steppe warriors suddenly had no space to run. Once a horse archer is trapped in close combat, it's over. Their bows become useless, their agility meaningless. The circle broke, then it collapsed. What had begun as a ghostly dance turned into chaos. Bodies, horses, dust, screams. The unbeatable warriors of the steppes were crushed. Ancient estimates say around 1,000 Scythians were killed, including a significant leader. Around 150 prisoners were taken. Numbers in ancient history are often rounded or exaggerated, but the outcome was clearly decisive. Macedonian losses were low, far lower than expected against mounted archers, but victory came with a personal cost. Alexander, still ill, reportedly collapsed afterward. Whether from the stress of the battle, the fever, or accumulated exhaustion, he needed days to recover. The political impact was immediate. The Scythian king sent envoys, offering apologies and requesting peace. Alexander accepted. The Jaxartes River, modern Daria, was established as the northern limit of his empire. He never pushed deeper into the steppes, not because he was afraid, but because insurgencies behind him demanded his attention. And the cost of fighting open-range nomads was strategically unrewarding. But the battle had proven one thing. Nomadic horse archers were not invincible. A disciplined, flexible army, using combined arms and creative tactics, could defeat them. The Battle of Jaxartes shows the essence of Alexander's military genius. Adaptability. He wasn't just brave, he wasn't just aggressive, he understood that the tools of war could be reimagined. He transformed siege engines into field artillery. He used terrain as a weapon. He baited a mobile enemy and trapped them using coordination rather than brute force. It wasn't destiny, it wasn't myth, that it was innovation. And now I'll leave you with one question. Do you think Alexander could have conquered the Russian steppes if he hadn't gotten sick? Share your thoughts in the comments.